Captain Ji-hoon Kim felt the cold metal floor of Station Kepler 7 beneath his boots as he stepped out of the transport ship. His heart was beating fast, but he kept his face calm. This was it, the moment Earth had been waiting for. He was the first human ever invited to the Galactic Peace Summit, and everyone back home was counting on him. The space station was huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. Bright lights lined the curved walls, and the air smelled different, cleaner, somehow with a hint of something sweet he couldn't identify. As he walked toward the main hall, Ji-hoon could hear voices speaking in languages that sounded like music, wind, and sometimes like crystal bells ringing. When the automatic doors slid open, Ji-hoon stepped into a room that took his breath away. The ceiling stretched up so high he could barely see the top, and holographic displays showed star maps of the entire galaxy. Delegates from 12 different alien species stood in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. But the moment Ji-hoon entered, everything went silent. He had expected this. Humans were the newest species to join the galactic community, and most of these beings had never seen one of his kind before. Ji-hoon straightened his shoulders and walked forward with steady steps, just like his military training had taught him. He wasn't going to let Earth down by looking nervous or weak. Near the center of the room stood Lyra, the Zephyrian ambassador. Her skin looked like it was made of blue crystal, catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the floor. When she moved, her people were known for being logical and cold, never showing emotion. But as Ji-hoon walked past, something strange happened. Lyra's large silver eyes followed him, tracking his every movement. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to figure out a puzzle she had never seen before. To his left, Princess Vera of the Etherians watched from beside a glowing fountain. The Etherians were famous throughout the galaxy for their beauty. Their skin actually glowed with soft light, like stars made into people. Vera was considered one of the most beautiful beings in known space, and she was used to everyone staring at her in wonder. But now she found herself staring at someone else. When Ji-hoon stopped and gave her a respectful bow, acknowledging her royal status, she felt something flutter in her chest that she had never experienced before. Across the room, council member Zara of the Valorians stood tall and proud. Her people were warriors, known for their strength and their flowing silver-colored bodies that moved like liquid metal. Zara was used to commanding respect wherever she went, used to other beings stepping aside when she approached. She had expected this human to be small and weak, like most of the stories she had heard. But watching Ji-hoon move through the room, she saw something unexpected. Quiet confidence, controlled strength, and a kind of intensity that reminded her of the greatest Valorian warriors. What surprised all three alien women was how different the human was from what they had expected. The reports had described humans as violent and primitive, barely civilized enough to join galactic society. But this human moved with purpose and grace. When he nodded to each delegation, his gestures were respectful but not submissive. His dark eyes were alert and intelligent, taking in everything around him without missing a detail. Ji-hoon had no idea that three of the most powerful and beautiful beings in the galaxy were studying his every move. He was focused on his mission, to represent Earth well and help secure humanity's place among the stars. As he took his position at the human delegation's assigned spot, he could feel many eyes on him, but he kept his attention on the task ahead. The P. Summit was about to begin, and the future of human civilization hung in the balance. The strategy room was smaller than the main hall, with a circular table that seemed to float in the center. Holographic star maps flickered above it, showing contested territories that had been fought over for decades. Ji-hoon took his seat among the 12 delegates, feeling the weight of representing his entire species. For the first hour, he simply listened. The alien delegates argued back and forth about trade routes, mining rights, and border disputes. Their voices rose and fell like ocean waves, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. Ji-hoon noticed how each species had their own way of debating. The Zephyrians spoke in cold, logical statements, the Etherians used flowing, poetic language, and the Valorians made bold declarations that sounded like battle cries. Lyra found herself glancing at the human more often than she should. While other delegates interrupted each other or tapped impatiently on the table, Ji-hoon sat perfectly still. His dark eyes moved from speaker to speaker, and she could almost see him filing away every piece of information. When the Krellian ambassador made a particularly complex point about fuel distribution, she watched Jihoon nod slightly, as if he understood connections that others were missing. The debate had been going in circles for 2 hours when High Chancellor Vex, a tall being with purple skin and 4 arms, finally turned to Jihoon. "Human representative," Vex said in a voice that sounded like grinding metal, "your species is new to our conflicts. What does Earth propose for the Sigma Quadrant dispute, the sea?" Room went quiet. All eyes turned to Jihoon, and some of the aliens leaned forward in their chairs. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, to see if humans really belonged at this table. Jihoon stood up slowly, his hands resting calmly on the table. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. "Thank you, Chancellor Vex. I've been listening to all of your concerns, and I think I see the real problem here." He gestured to the holographic map, and his hands moved with purpose as he pointed to different star systems. "You're all arguing about who controls what, but you're missing the bigger picture. The Sigma Quadrant isn't valuable because of the planets. It's valuable because it's the shortest route between 3 major trade centers." Princess Vera, who had been trying to focus on the discussion, found her attention drawn to something else entirely. When Jihoon concentrated, tiny lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. She had never seen anything like it before. Etherians didn't age the same way, and their faces never showed such expressions. There was something fascinating about how his features changed when he was thinking deeply. "What if," Jihoon continued, "instead of fighting over who owns the route, we create a joint administration? Each species contributes ships for protection, and everyone shares the profits based on their contribution." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Council member Zara sat back in her chair, studying the human with new interest. In all her years as a warrior and diplomat, she had seen countless negotiations. Usually, the strongest faction simply took what they wanted, and the weaker ones had to accept it. But this human was suggesting something completely different: cooperation instead of domination. "The Valorian Empire has the strongest fleet," Zara said, testing him. "Why should we share power with weaker species?" Jihoon turned to face her, directly, and his expression remained respectful but firm. "Because, Council Member Zara, strength isn't just about having the biggest chips. It's about building something that lasts. If the Valorians take control by force, the other species will always resent it. They'll look for ways to rebel or undermine you. But if everyone has a stake in the success of the trade route, they'll all work to protect it." What struck Zara most wasn't just his words, but how he said them. He didn't try to flatter her or appeal to Valorian pride. He spoke to her as an equal, even though his species was barely 100 years into space travel, while hers had ruled star systems for millennia. Lyra watched as Jihoon outlined his proposal in detail, his hands sketching patrol routes and supply stations in the air above the holographic display. His plan was elegant in its simplicity, addressing concerns that had seemed impossible to solve. But what impressed her most was how he had listened to every delegate's complaints and found ways to address them all. The session ended 3 hours later with something that hadn't happened in decades: a preliminary agreement that all 12 species could accept. As the delegates filed out, many of them were talking excitedly about the humans' proposals. Jihoon remained seated, reviewing his notes and preparing for the next session. He had no idea that he had just done something remarkable, or that 3 of the galaxy's most influential women were seeing him in a completely new light. The explosion shook the entire station at exactly 14:32 Galactic Standard Time. Jihoon was reviewing trade agreements in his quarters when the lights flickered and an alarm began wailing through the corridors. The sound was unlike anything he had heard before, a deep, pulsing tone that seemed to vibrate through his bones. Emergency. Announcements echoed through the station in 12 different languages. Jihoon caught enough of the Universal Translator's output to understand the situation. Hostile forces had breached the outer hull. This wasn't an accident or system failure. Station Kepler 7 was under attack. Within seconds, Jihoon was moving. His military training kicked in automatically as he grabbed his emergency communicator and headed for the door. The corridors were already filling with panicked delegates and station personnel. Beings who had been calmly debating politics just hours earlier were now running in different directions, their voices raised in fear and confusion. Near the central hub, Jihoon found chaos. A group of Zephyrian diplomats stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, their crystalline skin flickering with stress patterns. Their logical minds, so sharp during negotiations, seemed unable to process the sudden violence. Some were trying to calculate the safest route to the escape pods, while others simply stood motionless. "This way," Jihoon called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "Follow me to evacuation zone 3. Lyra looked up from her confused delegation, surprised to see the human taking charge. While her people debated probabilities and risk assessments, Jihoon was already moving with purpose. He had somehow obtained a station layout and was marking safe routes with quick, confident gestures. "Ambassador Lyra," Jihoon said as he approached her group, "your people need to move now. The attackers are coming from the docking bays, so the main evacuation routes are compromised. But there's a service corridor 2 levels down that leads directly to the emergency shuttles." What amazed Lyra was how calm he remained. His hands were steady as he showed her the route on his tablet, his voice clear and reassuring. While everyone else was driven by panic, the human seemed to be thinking 3 steps ahead. "How do you know this?" she asked, even as she began organizing her people to follow his directions. "I studied the station blueprints before we arrived," Jihoon replied simply. "Always have an escape plan." As Lyra led her delegation toward safety, she couldn't help but look back. The human was already helping the next group, a family of Etherian traders who were crying in fear. He knelt down to their level, speaking in gentle tones while pointing out the safest path. Meanwhile, Princess Vera was trapped in a completely different part of the station. She had been in the observation deck when the attack began, and now debris blocked the main exits. The beautiful chamber that had offered stunning views of space was quickly becoming a death trap, as hull breaches sucked air into the void. Through the chaos, she heard a familiar voice shouting orders. Somehow Jihoon had made it to their section of the station. He was directing a group of Valorian guards, but one of them was badly injured, a massive warrior who had been caught by falling debris. Vera watched in shock as Jihoon approached the wounded Valorian. The alien was easily 3 times the human's size, with dense muscle and thick armor plating. Moving him seemed impossible, especially for someone as small as Jihoon. "I can't leave him," the human said to the other guards. "Help me get him up." But the other Valorians were already retreating, following their training to save themselves first. Vera saw Jihoon look around, realize he was alone, and then do something that took her breath away. He bent down and somehow managed to get the injured warrior onto his shoulders. The human's face turned red with effort as he lifted the enormous alien. His legs shook under the weight, but he didn't stop moving. Step by step, he carried the Valorian toward the emergency exit, sweat pouring down his face. "You're going to hurt yourself," Vera called out as she ran to help support the warrior's other side. "Can't leave anyone behind," Jihoon gasped, but he didn't slow down. "That's not who we are." Across the station, Council member Zara was witnessing something equally remarkable. From the security center, she watched Jihoon coordinate the entire evacuation through the communication system. He had somehow taken control of the station's defenses and was turning a chaotic retreat into an organized resistance. "Guard units 7 and 12, fall back to checkpoint Alpha," his voice crackled. Through the speakers, "Civilian groups, proceed to evacuation zones via routes I'm transmitting now. Security team leaders, report your positions." What impressed Zara wasn't just his tactical thinking, but how he managed to maintain morale. His voice never showed panic or uncertainty, even when the situation looked hopeless. When a Krelian security chief reported that his position was being overrun, Jihoon calmly redirected 2 other units to provide support. "Sir," the Krelian's voice was filled with relief. "The reinforcements arrived just in time. How did you know exactly where we needed help?" Zara found herself leaning closer to the monitors, watching Jihoon work. He had turned the security center into a command post, with multiple screens showing different parts of the station. His hands moved quickly across the controls, tracking friendly forces and predicting enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. The attack lasted for 3 hours, but, under Jihoon's coordination, the casualties were far lower than anyone had expected. As the last terrorist was captured and the station secured, word spread quickly through the corridors about the human who had saved so many lives. Jihoon collapsed into a chair in the security center, exhausted but still alert. He was already planning recovery operations and security improvements for the rest of the summit. He had no idea that his actions had changed how 3 of the galaxy's most powerful women saw him forever. The security briefing room felt tense as Station Commander Thrick spread out the holographic map of Kepler-7's lower levels. Red dots marked where the terrorists had last been spotted before disappearing into the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the diplomatic quarters. "We've lost all contact with our security teams down there," Commander Thrick said, his 4 eyes blinking nervously. "The tunnels are a maze, over 200 kilometers of passages, most of them unlit and unmapped. Our sensors can't penetrate that deep into the station's core." The assembled security chiefs from different species looked grim. The Valorian captain suggested using heavy weapons to blast through the tunnel walls. The Zephyrian tactical officer recommended flooding the entire section with sleeping gas. Each solution seemed to create more problems than it solved. "I'll go," Jihoon said quietly from the back of the room. Everyone turned to stare at the human. He was the smallest person in the room, barely reaching the shoulders of most alien security officers. The idea of him hunting trained terrorists through dark tunnels seemed almost absurd. "Captain Kim," Commander Thrick said carefully, "these are dangerous criminals with advanced weapons. They've already killed several of our best security personnel." "That's exactly why I need to go," Jihoon replied, stepping forward to study the tunnel map. "Your people are thinking like soldiers, going in with heavy equipment and bright lights. But down there, that just makes you a target. This needs to be done quietly, carefully." Within an hour, Jihoon was suiting up in lightweight armor and checking his equipment. He had requested only basic gear: a simple energy weapon, a small medkit, and a handheld scanner. Most importantly, he carried no heavy lights or communication devices that might give away his position. Lyra, Vera, and Zara watched from the security center as cameras tracked Jihoon's descent into the tunnel system. The first few levels were well lit and clean, but as he went deeper, the passages became darker and more cramped. "This is insane," muttered the Valorian security chief. "He can't see anything down there." But on the monitors they could see that Jihoon was moving with purpose. He paused frequently, running his fingers along the tunnel walls and studying the floor. When he reached a junction with 5 different passages, he knelt down and examined something that the cameras couldn't pick up. "What is he looking at?" Vera whispered, leaning closer to the screen. Commander Thrick's enhanced the camera feed, but all they could see was a seemingly clean section of floor. Jihoon, however, seemed to be reading some kind of invisible message. After a moment, he chose the leftmost tunnel and continued forward. "He's tracking them," Lyra realized with amazement. "Somehow he's following their trail." For 3 hours, they watched Jihoon move through the maze of tunnels. He never seemed lost or confused, never backtracked or hesitated at intersections. It was as if he could sense exactly where the terrorists had gone. When he paused to rest, he would touch the walls again, sometimes even putting his ear against the metal to listen for something. "How is he doing that?" asked the Zephyrian officer. "Our best tracking equipment can't detect anything in those tunnels." What they were witnessing was something that advanced alien technology couldn't replicate: human intuition, combined with primitive tracking skills. Jihoon was reading signs that their sensors missed, the faint scuff marks on tunnel walls where armed figures had passed, the barely detectable change in airflow that indicated a hidden chamber, the subtle vibrations through the metal that revealed movement far ahead. Vera found herself holding her breath as Jihoon approached what looked like a dead end. The tunnel seemed to stop at a solid wall, but instead of turning back, he examined the barrier carefully. His hands moved across its surface until he found something, a hidden panel that slid aside to reveal a secret passage. The hidden tunnel led to a large chamber that the station's blueprints didn't show. Through Jihoon's small helmet camera, they could see it was filled with sophisticated equipment and stolen supplies. But more importantly, 3 terrorists sat around a table, planning their next attack. This was the moment when most soldiers would call for backup or wait for reinforcements. The smart tactical choice was to report the position and let a full strike team handle the capture. But as they watched, Jihoon did something unexpected. He moved closer. "What is he doing?" Zara breathed, recognizing the dangerous position he was putting himself in. Jihoon crept to within a few meters of the terrorists before they noticed him. When they finally spotted his approach, their leader, a scarred Krellian, raised his weapon with a snarl. "To drop your guns," Jihoon said calmly, his own weapon trained on them. "You're surrounded." It was a complete bluff. Jihoon was alone, outnumbered and deep underground, where no help could reach him quickly. But something in his voice, in the quiet confidence of his stance, made the terrorists hesitate. "You're lying," the Krellian leader said, but his voice shook slightly. "Am I?" Jihoon asked. "Your escape routes are blocked. Station security knows exactly where you are. Your only choice is to surrender peacefully or face the consequences." For long minutes they stared at each other in tense silence. In the security center above, everyone watched with amazement as the humans somehow convinced 3 dangerous criminals to lay down their weapons without firing a single shot. But what impressed the watching delegates most wasn't his tactical skill or his bravery. It was what happened next. As he secured the prisoners, Jihoon noticed that one of them was wounded, bleeding from an injury sustained during their escape through the tunnels. Instead of leaving the terrorist to suffer, Jihoon opened his medkit and began treating the wound. His movements were gentle and professional, the same care he would show to any injured person. "Why are you helping me?" the wounded terrorist asked in confusion. "Because you're hurt," Jihoon replied simply, never stopping his work. That's what humans do. When backup finally arrived to escort the prisoners, they found Jihoon waiting calmly with 3 secured terrorists, one of whom was bandaged and clearly grateful for the medical attention he had received. As he emerged from the tunnels hours later, tired but successful, Jihoon had no idea that his actions had left 3 alien women questioning everything they thought they knew about strength, courage, and what it meant to be civilized. The hunt was over, but the real impression he had made was just beginning. The alert came at 03:47 station time, piercing through the quiet corridors with urgent, flashing red lights. Jihoon was barely asleep when his communicator screamed to life with Commander Thrix's panicked voice. "All senior personnel to the command center immediately. We have a critical situation." When Jihoon arrived at the command center, still pulling on his uniform jacket, he found chaos. Engineers were shouting over each other while pointing at screens filled with warning messages. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. "What's the situation?" Jihoon asked, moving to the central display where a holographic model of the station rotated slowly. Chief Engineer Vox, a tall being with tentacles instead of arms, turned to face him. Her usually calm demeanor had cracked, and her skin showed the stress patterns of her species. The captured terrorists had a backup plan. They planted a fusion bomb in the reactor core before we caught them. The blood drained from Jihoon's face as he stared at the display. A small red dot pulsed ominously in the heart of the station, right next to the main power source that kept 40,000 beings alive. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. "Less than 2 hours," Vox replied, her tentacles shaking. "But that's not the worst part. The bomb is surrounded by an energy field that will detonate it instantly if we try to disarm it remotely. Someone has to go down there and shut it off manually." "Then send a team," suggested the Valorian security chief. "My best warriors can—" "No," Vox interrupted. "The reactor core is flooded with lethal radiation right now. The cooling systems were damaged in the attack. Anyone who goes down there will absorb a fatal dose within minutes. Even our most advanced protective suits can't shield someone for long enough to reach the bomb and disarm it." A heavy silence fell over the command center. Everyone understood what this meant. Whoever volunteered for this mission would not be coming back alive. "I'll go," Jihoon said simply. Every head in the room turned to stare at him. The alien delegates, who had gathered to monitor the crisis, looked shocked. Humans were supposed to be selfish and primitive, focused only on their own survival. "Captain Kim," Commander Thrix said slowly, You understand what you're volunteering for? The radiation levels will kill you long before you can get back to safety. I understand, Jihoon replied, already moving toward the equipment lockers. But I also understand that 40,000 innocent people will die if I don't try. The choice is simple. In the security center, Lyra watched the preparations with a feeling she had never experienced before. Her two hearts were beating so fast she thought they might burst. Zephyrians were logical beings who made decisions based on mathematics and probability. But watching Jihoon calmly check his equipment while knowing he was about to die made her feel something beyond logic. There has to be another way, she whispered to herself, but she knew there wasn't. Her species' greatest scientists had already run every calculation. The human was walking into certain death. Princess Vera stood frozen by the observation window, her luminescent skin flickering erratically with distress. In Etherian culture, death was seen as a beautiful transition, a return to the cosmic light. That created all life. But this felt different. This felt like watching a star burn out too soon, robbing the universe of its brilliance. The engineering team helped Jihoon into the most advanced radiation suit they had. The bulky equipment made him look smaller and more fragile than ever. Layers of protective material covered every inch of his body, but everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. The bomb is located in Chamber 7, Chief Engineer Vox explained as she downloaded the schematics to his helmet display. You'll need to crawl through 3 separate conduits to reach it. The disarming sequence is complex, 17 different steps that must be performed in exact order. I've got it, Jihoon said, studying the information. His voice was steady through the suit's speakers, showing no fear or hesitation. As he prepared to enter the reactor core, Jihoon turned back to the assembled delegates. Through his helmet, visor, his eyes found Lyra, Vera, and Zara in the crowd. Tell my people back on Earth, he said quietly, that I was proud to represent humanity today. Tell them that we kept our promise to be good neighbors to the galaxy. Council member Zara felt something break inside her chest as she watched the human turn and walk toward the sealed entrance to the reactor core. Valorians were warriors who faced death in battle with pride and fury. They sang war songs and made grand speeches before their final moments. But this human was walking into death with quiet dignity, thinking only of others even in his final minutes. For the first time in her long life, tears began flowing down Zara's silver cheeks. In Valorian society, crying was seen as weakness, something only children did. But she couldn't stop herself. The depth of the human sacrifice had shattered something fundamental in her understanding of courage. The massive doors to the reactor core slid open with a deep rumble, revealing a tunnel filled with swirling, dangerous energy. Warning lights bathed everything in angry red light, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with radiation. Jihoon paused at the threshold, took a deep breath that no one could hear, and stepped inside. The doors sealed behind him with a final, thunderous clang that echoed through the command center like a funeral bell. Through his helmet camera, everyone could see his point of view as he began the journey into the heart of the station. The tunnel stretched ahead like a throat leading into hell itself. Radiation levels are already climbing, reported the chief medical officer, monitoring Jihoon's suit readings. He has maybe 20 minutes before the exposure becomes lethal, but 20 minutes was exactly how long the engineers estimated it would take to reach the bomb and disarm it. Jihoon was racing against death itself, and everyone watching knew that time was not on his side. As he disappeared deeper into the radioactive maze, 3 alien women found themselves praying to whatever gods they believed in, hoping that somehow, against all odds, the human who had already given them so much might find a way to survive what came next. The medical bay doors burst open as emergency teams rushed Jihoon inside on a floating stretcher. His radiation suit had been carefully removed in the decontamination chamber, revealing burns along his arms and neck where the protective seals had failed. His skin was pale and his breathing was shallow, but his eyes were still alert. "Bomb disarmed successfully," he whispered to Commander Thrix as the medical team began their work. "Station is secure." Even while fighting radiation poisoning, his first words were about the mission's success and everyone else's safety. Dr. Kess, the station's chief medical officer, was a healer from the Meridian system, a species known throughout the galaxy for their advanced medical knowledge. Her 4 delicate hands moved quickly over scanning devices as she assessed Jihoon's condition. "The radiation exposure is severe," she announced to the assembled delegates who had crowded into the medical bay. "His cellular structure has been damaged, and his immune system is compromised. The next 72 hours will be critical." What followed was something unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history. 3 of the most powerful female leaders in known space took shifts sitting by a human's bedside, watching over his recovery. Lyra was the first to volunteer for the night watch. As a Zephyrian, she didn't require much sleep, and her logical mind told her that someone should monitor his condition. But as she sat in the quiet medical bay, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, she realized her reasons went deeper than logic. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly during his second night, when his fever had broken and he was awake but still weak. Jihoon turned his head slowly to look at her. His voice was hoarse from the breathing treatments. 40,000 people, he said simply. "How could I not?" "But you barely know any of us," Lyra pointed out. "Your species has been part of the galactic community for less than 5 years. You had no obligation to sacrifice yourself for aliens." A small smile crossed Jihoon's face. "That's where you're wrong, Ambassador. The moment we joined this community, everyone here became our neighbors. And humans don't abandon their neighbors." Lyra felt something shift inside her crystalline chest. In Zephyrian culture, decisions were made based on calculated benefit and logical outcomes. But this human had made the ultimate sacrifice based purely on principle, something her people had forgotten how to do. "Your medical scans are improving," she told him, checking the displays. "Dr. Kess says your body is healing faster than expected." "Humans are tougher than we look," Jihoon replied with a weak chuckle. "We had to be, growing up on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us." As the hours passed, Lyra found herself asking about Earth and human culture. Jihoon told her stories about his childhood, about learning to swim in Earth's oceans and hiking through ancient forests. He spoke about human cities where millions of different people lived together peacefully, despite their differences. "Dagona, Earth, we have a saying," he told her as dawn approached. "It takes a village to raise a child. We learned long ago that we're stronger when we take care of each other." When Princess Vera took over the next shift, she brought with her a small device that projected soft, healing light, a gift from her people's medical traditions. She had never sat vigil over anyone before. As royalty, she was usually the one being cared for, not the one providing care. You don't have to stay," Jihoon told her when he noticed her adjusting the light projector for the 3rd time. "I'm sure you have important diplomatic duties." "Nothing more important than this," Vera replied, surprising herself with the honesty of her words. As Jihoon's strength returned, Vera discovered something remarkable about him. Despite being weak and in pain, he constantly asked about others. Had the wounded guard from the terrorist attack recovered? Were the evacuated civilians settling back into their quarters? Was the engineering staff getting enough rest after working so hard to repair the damage? "Why do you worry about everyone else when you're the one lying in a hospital bed?" Vera asked. "Because worrying about others keeps me from feeling sorry for myself," Jihoon answered, with that same gentle smile. "Besides, I'll heal. Some problems are harder to fix than radiation poisoning." When Vera's cousin, a young Etherian prince, came to visit, Jihoon immediately noticed the family resemblance and asked thoughtful questions about the prince's studies. He remembered details from their brief conversation days later, asking how a particularly difficult exam had gone. "You have an amazing memory," Vera observed. "Not really," Jihoon said, adjusting his position carefully. "I just think people are interesting. Your cousin is nervous about taking over diplomatic duties someday, but he's got good instincts. He'll do fine." Council member Zara took the final shift, arriving as Jihoon was finally able to sit up without assistance. She had expected this time to be awkward. Valorians were not known for bedside manner. Their culture valued strength and action, not gentle conversation. But within minutes, Jihoon had her laughing. "So this massive Valorian warrior is standing there," he was saying, describing his first day on the station. "And I'm thinking I should probably salute or bow or something impressive. Instead, I trip over my own feet and nearly fall face first into the welcome ceremony." You didn't, Zara gasped, her silver features creasing with amusement. Oh, I did. Your ambassador was very polite about it, but I could see him trying not to smile. First impression of humanity. We're clumsy but harmless. What amazed Zara was how easily Jihoon laughed at himself. Valorian warriors spent their lives building reputations and maintaining dignity. The idea of admitting weakness or failure was almost unthinkable. But this human seemed comfortable with his imperfections. Doesn't it bother you, she asked, being seen as weak or foolish? Why would it? Jihoon replied, genuinely puzzled. I am weak and foolish sometimes, we all are. The trick is learning from it and not taking yourself too seriously. As his recovery progressed, all three women began to understand something profound. Jihoon's strength didn't come from physical power or advanced technology. It came from his willingness to be vulnerable, to care about others even when it cost him something, and to find humor even in the darkest moments. By the time Dr. Kess cleared him for light duty, Lyra, Vera, and Zara had learned more about humanity than all their intelligence reports combined could have taught them. They had witnessed something their advanced civilizations had lost somewhere along the path to perfection. The simple, radical act of putting others before yourself, not because you had to, but because it was the right thing to do. During the long hours of recovery, when pain medication made sleep difficult and the medical bay felt too quiet, Jihoon found himself talking about home. It started with simple questions from his visitors, but gradually became something deeper, a window into what made humanity different from every other species in the galaxy. Tell me about Earth, Lyra said one evening, settling into the chair beside his bed. Your planet sounds so different from our world reports. Jihoon's eyes grew distant as he thought about blue skies and green forests. It's beautiful, he said softly, but it's also dangerous. When humans first appeared, everything on our planet was trying to kill us. We weren't the strongest or the fastest or the smartest creatures. We were just stubborn. He shifted, carefully, still tender from his injuries. We had predators with claws longer than my hand, diseases that could wipe out entire communities, and weather that could freeze or burn us to death. Other species might have given up or evolved into something tougher, but humans, we just kept trying. How did you survive? Vera asked, genuinely curious. Her people had evolved on a peaceful world where survival was never in question. We learned to work together, Jihoon explained. One human alone couldn't kill a mammoth or survive a winter storm, but 10 humans working together could bring down prey twice their size and build shelters that lasted for generations. We became the species that shared. Zara leaned forward, interested despite herself. Shared what? Everything, Jihoon said with a smile. Food, shelter, knowledge, stories. We told each other which plants were poisonous and which ones could heal. We shared fire and tools and ideas. When one tribe discovered something useful, it spread to other tribes, even ones they'd never met. As the days passed, the three women learned about human history through Jihoon's stories. He told them about ancient farmers who saved seeds through harsh winters, knowing that sharing food now meant everyone would eat next year. He described explorers who sailed into unknown oceans, not for conquest, but simply to see what was there. We've always been curious, Jihoon said during one of their conversations. Sometimes stupidly curious. We climb mountains just to see the view from the top. We dive to the bottom of oceans just to find out what's down there. We shot ourselves into space in metal cans, knowing we might never come back, just because we wanted to touch the stars. That sounds terrifying, Lyra admitted. Her people calculated every risk before taking action. It was, Jihoon agreed cheerfully. We lost a lot of good people learning how to fly, how to navigate, how to survive in space. But each failure taught us something new. And we always remembered the ones who didn't make it back. He grew quieter, more serious. That's maybe the most important thing about humans. We remember, every person who dies trying to make life better for others becomes part of our story. Their sacrifice pushes us to do better, be better. Vera found herself thinking about her own people's history. The Etherians had evolved beyond death in most traditional senses, their consciousness transferring to new forms when their bodies failed. The concept of permanent, meaningful loss was foreign to them. You said humans aren't the strongest or smartest, she observed, but you survived when others didn't. How? Hope, Jihoon said without hesitation. Probably the most ridiculous thing about humans is that we never know when to quit. When faced with impossible odds, we don't calculate the probability of success. We ask ourselves, what if we try anyway? He gestured weakly at the medical equipment around him. Like coming here. Earth could have stayed isolated, safe in our own solar system. Instead, we decided to join a galactic community where we're the newest, smallest, weakest member. Why? Because we hoped we might make friends. We hoped we could learn something new. We hoped we might even help. Zara felt something twist in her chest as she listened. Valorian culture was built on strength and dominance. They respected power and conquered the weak. But this human was describing a completely different way of living. You helped save this station, she pointed out. You nearly died for people you barely knew. Why? Jihoon looked at her with those steady brown eyes that had seen him through radiation and pain. Because that's what neighbors do. When your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't stop to ask if they've been nice to you lately. You grab a bucket and start fighting the flames. But we're not your neighbors, Lyra protested. We're aliens from different star systems. Some of our species have never even spoken to each other before this summit. Doesn't matter, Jihoon said firmly. The moment we all agreed to share this space, to try to build peace together, we became neighbors. And humans have a rule about neighbors. Nobody gets left behind. As his strength returned, Jihoon began sharing more stories, not just about survival and struggle, but about joy and discovery. He told them about human art and music, about poets who found beauty in ordinary moments, and scientists who spent their lives studying tiny insects just because they found them fascinating. We have a composer named Beethoven who wrote some of his greatest music after he went deaf, Jihoon said during one afternoon conversation. He couldn't hear the notes anymore, but he could feel them in his bones. He created beauty that people still listen to hundreds of years later. How does someone create music they can't hear? Vera asked, amazed. The same way humans do everything else, Jihoon replied with a grin. We figure it out as we go, we adapt, we keep trying until we find a way. During these quiet talks, each of the three women began to understand what had drawn them to the human. From the beginning, it wasn't his physical appearance or even his tactical skill. It was something deeper, a fundamental difference in how he approached life itself. Lyra realized that what fascinated her wasn't his body or his competence, but his unshakable belief that doing the right thing mattered more than personal cost. In a galaxy where most decisions were based on logical benefit, Jihoon operated on principles that seemed almost naive in their simplicity. Vera understood that her attraction came from witnessing someone who chose kindness not as a weakness, but as a form of strength. He was gentle because he was confident enough to be vulnerable, caring because he was brave enough to risk being hurt. Zara recognized that what impressed her most wasn't his tactical brilliance, but his refusal to use that brilliance for personal gain. He was a warrior who fought only to protect, a strategist who planned only for the benefit of others. As Jihoon's recovery neared completion, all three women found themselves changed by what they had learned. They had discovered that true strength came not from advanced evolution or superior technology, but from the simple revolutionary choice to care about someone other than yourself. The grand ceremonial hall of Station Kepler 7 had been transformed for the final day of the summit. Banners from 12 different worlds hung from the curved ceiling, their colors creating a rainbow of galactic unity. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered around the massive signing table where the peace treaties lay waiting for their formal approval. Jihoon stood with the Earth delegation, wearing his dress uniform with its simple blue and silver design. Compared to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor of the other delegates, he looked almost plain. But as he took his place at the table, something had changed in how the others looked at him. Ambassador Lyra approached the signing table with measured steps, her crystalline skin catching the light as it always did. For her entire life, she had been told that Zephyrians were the most beautiful beings in the galaxy. Their crystal-like features were considered the perfect blend of logic and aesthetics. Other species often stared at her in wonder, mesmerized by the way light danced across her translucent skin. But as she glanced toward Ji-hoon, something struck her like a physical blow. For the first time in her long life, she realized that her beauty was only surface deep. It was something she had been born with, not something she had earned or chosen. Her crystalline skin was just an accident of evolution, no more meaningful than the color of a star or the shape of a moon. Ji-hoon's face, by contrast, showed the marks of someone who had lived and chosen and sacrificed. The small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the laugh lines around his eyes from years of finding joy in simple things, the gentle strength in his expression that came from making difficult decisions and living with their consequences. True beauty, she whispered to herself, finally understanding what she had been witnessing all week. It wasn't about perfect features or flawless skin. It was about character, about the choices someone made when no one was watching, about the courage to do right even when it cost everything. Princess Vera stood nearby, her body glowing with the soft, warm light that made Etherians famous throughout the galaxy. Since childhood, she had been praised for her luminescence, told that her people's natural glow was a sign of their spiritual evolution. Etherian light was considered sacred by many species, a physical manifestation of inner purity and cosmic connection. But watching Ji-hoon sign the peace treaty with hands that still bore faint marks from radiation burns, Vera suddenly saw her own glow differently. It was just biology, she realized, just another evolutionary trait that had developed over millions of years. She hadn't earned her light any more than a firefly earned its glow. The light she had seen in Ji-hoon was different. It came from within, from choices he made every day. When he had walked into that reactor core, knowing he might die, his determination had blazed brighter than any Etherian's biological luminescence. When he sat by hospital beds comforting other patients while recovering from his own injuries, his kindness had shone more brilliantly than any evolutionary adaptation. Real light comes from the soul, Vera thought, feeling tears gather in her eyes. Not from chemistry or evolution. Council member Zara stood with the Valorian delegation, her silver form towering over most of the other representatives. The Valorians had built their entire culture around strength and dominance. Their military might was legendary, their warriors respected and feared across the galaxy. Zara herself had commanded fleets that could reduce planets to ash, had negotiated treaties from positions of overwhelming force. She had always believed that strength meant the ability to impose your will on others, to take what you wanted and crush anyone who stood in your way. The strong ruled, the weak served, and the universe bent to the desires of those with the biggest weapons and the most advanced technology. But Ji-hoon had shown her a completely different kind of strength. When he had the tactical advantage during the terrorist hunt, he had chosen mercy over vengeance. When he could have used his heroic status to demand special treatment, he had continued to serve others. When faced with certain death in the reactor core, he had walked forward without hesitation, not to prove his power but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Strength isn't about what you can destroy, Zara realized with shocking clarity. It's about what you choose to build, what you choose to protect, what you choose to save. As the ceremony continued, the three women found themselves seeing everything differently. The elaborate displays of wealth and power around them suddenly seemed hollow. The complicated political maneuvering that had dominated the summit felt petty and small. They watched Ji-hoon interact with delegates from species he had never met before, treating each one with the same respect and genuine interest. He didn't try to impress anyone with Earth's potential military might or economic resources. He simply listened to their concerns and looked for ways to help. When a young Andromedan delegate accidentally spilled ceremonial wine on her formal robes, Ji-hoon was the first to offer his handkerchief, joking gently to help her feel less embarrassed. When an elderly Centaurian ambassador struggled with the complex signing procedure, Ji-hoon quietly assisted, without drawing attention to the help he was providing. This is what we lost, Lyra thought, watching him guide a nervous, first-time delegate through the protocol. Somewhere in our pursuit of perfection, we forgot how to simply care about each other. We became so focused on our evolution, Vera realized, that we stopped evolving where it mattered most, in our hearts. We built empires and conquered worlds, Zara understood with painful clarity. But we forgot that the greatest conquest is conquering your own selfishness. As the final signatures were placed on the treaties and the summit officially concluded, the three women looked around the grand hall with new eyes. They saw delegates from 12 species, each proud of their advanced civilizations and unique achievements. But they also saw what was missing, the simple, radical commitment to putting others first that seemed to come so naturally to the human in their midst. The summit had been called to create peace between the stars. But for Lyra, Vera, and Zara, something even more important had been achieved. They had discovered that true advancement wasn't measured in technology or evolution or military might. It was measured in how much you were willing to sacrifice for someone else's happiness. And by that measure, the supposedly primitive humans had left the rest of the galaxy far behind. The revelation was both humbling and inspiring. They had come to the summit expecting to teach the newest species how to behave in civilized galactic society. Instead, they were leaving with lessons that would change their peoples forever. The departure lounge of Station Kepler 7 bustled with activity as delegates from 12 worlds prepared to return home. Transport ships of every imaginable design lined up outside the massive viewing windows, their crews loading diplomatic cargo and preparing for journeys that would span months of hyperspace travel. Jehoon stood near the Earth transport, checking his personal belongings one final time. The summit had officially ended, and his mission was complete. The peace treaties were signed, trade agreements established, and humanity had secured its place in the galactic community. As far as he was concerned, it had been a successful week of diplomacy, nothing more. He had no idea that three of the most influential women in the galaxy were watching him from across the departure lounge, each preparing to approach him with something they had never offered to anyone before. Ambassador Lyra was the first to make her move. She walked across the polished floor with her characteristic precise steps, but there was something different about her posture. The cold, logical bearing that defined Zephyrian diplomacy had softened into something warmer, more personal. "Captain Kim," she said as she approached, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that was unusual for her species. "Might I have a word with you privately?" Jehoon looked up from his packing, surprised by the request. "Of course, Ambassador. What can I do for you?" Lyra led him to a quiet alcove overlooking the star field beyond the station. For a moment, she simply stood there, her crystalline features reflecting the distant light of nearby suns. "I want to make you a promise," she said finally, turning to face him directly. "Something that goes beyond the formal treaties we signed today." She reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small device, a Zephyrian communication crystal, that pulsed with soft blue light. "This is connected directly to the Zephyrian Fleet Command," she explained, offering it to him. "If Earth ever faces a threat, anywhere in the galaxy, activate this crystal. Our ships will come, not because of politics or trade agreements, but because of what you showed us this week." Jehoon stared at the crystal, understanding the magnitude of what she was offering. The Zephyrian fleet was one of the most advanced military forces in known space. Such a promise represented billions of credits in potential aid and protection. "Ambassador, I don't understand. This goes far beyond anything in our formal agreements." "The formal agreements are about governments and politics," Lyra replied, her silver eyes meeting his steadily. "This is about friendship. You taught me that some things matter more than calculations and logical benefit. If humans are willing to risk everything for strangers, then Zephyrians can learn to do the same for friends." As Lyra departed, Princess Vera approached from the opposite direction. Unlike her usual graceful glide, she seemed almost nervous, clutching something small in her luminescent hands. "Jehoon," she said, using his first name for the first time since they had met. "I have something for you. Something that has never been given to anyone outside our people." She opened her palm to reveal a crystal unlike anything he had ever seen. It was about the size of his thumb, perfectly clear, but somehow it seemed to contain its own light source. "This is an Etherian heart crystal," Vera explained, her voice soft with emotion. "It's formed in the core of our homeworld over thousands of years. But this one is special. It will glow whenever you act with pure intention, whenever you choose to do something not for personal gain but because it's the right thing to do. Jihoon accepted the crystal carefully, feeling its surprising warmth against his palm. "Princess, this is too valuable. I can't accept you already have," Vera interrupted gently. "You've been living with pure intention since the moment you arrived here. The crystal will simply remind you, and others, of what that looks like. As..." She turned to leave. She paused and looked back at him. "My people have spent millennia believing that our biological light made us special. You showed me that real light comes from choices, not evolution. That's a gift worth more than any crystal." The final approach came from an unexpected direction. Council member Zara strode across the departure lounge with her characteristic Valorian confidence. But when she reached Jihoon, she did something unprecedented. She knelt on one knee, bringing her imposing frame down to his eye level. "Captain, Kim of Earth," she said in a voice that carried across the nearby area, causing other delegates to stop and stare. "I offer you something that has never been offered to an outsider in the 1,000-year history of the Valorian Empire." She produced a medallion of burnished silver metal, engraved with symbols that seemed to shift and change in the station's lighting. "This is the mark of the Eternal Warrior," Zara explained, her voice filled with a respect that Valorians usually reserved only for their greatest heroes. "It grants you full citizenship in the Valorian Empire, with all the rights and protections that entails. You may call upon any Valorian military unit for aid, claim sanctuary on any Valorian world, and your voice will be heard in our highest councils." Jihoon stared at the medallion, overwhelmed by the implications. "Council member, I'm honored, but I don't understand what I've done to deserve this." "You redefined what strength means," Zara replied, rising to her feet but keeping her eyes level with his. "For centuries we believed that power came from domination, that strength meant the ability to conquer. You showed us that true warriors fight to protect, not to destroy. That real strength comes from choosing to use your power for others, even when it costs you everything." As word of these unprecedented gifts spread through the departure lounge, other delegates began to take notice. The sight of 3 of the galaxy's most powerful leaders making such personal commitments to a single human sent ripples of amazement through the assembled diplomats. But Jihoon himself seemed almost oblivious to the significance of what was happening. He thanked each of the women sincerely, but in his mind he had simply done his job. He had represented Earth to the best of his ability and tried to be helpful where he could. As his transport prepared for departure, Jihoon waved goodbye to the friends he had made during the summit. He settled into his seat for the long journey home, already thinking about his report to Earth Command and the debriefings that awaited him. He had no way of knowing that his actions over the past week would ripple outward for generations. Lyra would return to Zephyr Prime and propose fundamental changes to how her people approached interspecies relations. Vera would spark a renaissance in Etherian philosophy about the nature of true enlightenment. Zara would begin reforms in Valorian military doctrine that emphasized protection over conquest. Within a year, the human example would become a topic of study in academies across the galaxy. Diplomatic schools would teach courses on authentic leadership based on Jihoon's behavior during the crisis. Military academies would examine his tactical decisions not for their technical merit, but for their moral foundation. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't superior technology or advanced evolution. It was something far more dangerous to the status quo, the simple, radical idea that every life had value, that strength should be used to protect the weak, and that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. As Earth's transport disappeared into hyperspace, carrying Jihoon home to a world that would soon become the moral compass for an entire galaxy, 3 alien women stood at the viewing windows of Station Kepler 7, forever changed by their encounter with a species that had chosen kindness as their path to the stars. The age of human influence in galactic affairs had begun, not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple power of being better than anyone expected them to be.